For more than 50 years, the NSA and its Echelon partners have been considered the best in the super-secret world of signals intelligence.
During the Cold War, the NSA had enormous successes because we were able to watch the Soviet Union very closely. Every time a plane took off from a military base in the Soviet Union, we would know about it. Every time a ship went to sea, a submarine pulled out from its port, the United States would know about it. But those successes never translated into the war on terrorism.
Al-Qaeda was everything the Soviet Union was not. Above all, it was not a fixed target.
People transited to various countries around the world. They'd be one place one day, another place another day. They didn't use the same communications. They'd be using satellite phone here, a cell phone there, a landline here. They'd be using anonymous emails, servers. So all of a sudden, life got very, very difficult for NSA.
The NSA began tracking Al-Qaeda in the early 90s without much success, until 1996. That's when Osama bin Laden moved to Afghanistan, where the only way he could communicate with the outside world was with a satellite telephone.
Once Osama bin Laden began using that phone, the NSA began intercepting his phone calls. He was using a service known as Inmarsat, which is a satellite system used by ships at sea and explorers in remote areas.
We identified Osama bin Laden's telephone number as well as the telephone numbers of his other senior associates, some of whom were, based in Afghanistan, but others were living in Britain or Yemen, and we were able to, by identifying his key lieutenants and their telephone numbers, we were able to monitor their communications throughout much of the late 1990s.
From 1996 to 1998, the NSA listened in on more than 2,000 hours of calls on his phone.
During the 2 years that we monitored Osama bin Laden's satellite telephone communications, we used those intercepts and the intercepts of other Al-Qaeda leaders to foil a number of terrorist attacks overseas.
According to AID, in 1998 alone, these conversations revealed and foiled plans for a commercial airline hijacking and 7 attacks on American diplomatic and military targets, including one on the American forces stationed at Prince Sultan Air Force Base in Saudi Arabia. That was particularly significant since the NSA had failed to discover Al-Qaeda's plan to attack the Khobar Towers in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia in 1996. 19 American soldiers were killed.
In that particular instance, there was no intelligence warning prior to the bombing that would have allowed, Washington to prevent it from happening. In this case, the intelligence was there, and we were able to prevent the bombing.
In August 1998, the NSA and its Echelon partners were again caught by surprise when truck bombs blew up at the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 people. 2 months later, intercepts from Osama bin Laden's phone revealed he planned to meet with his top commanders at a training camp in Khost, Afghanistan. The U.S. attacked the camp with cruise missiles. Osama bin Laden, however, escaped and soon stopped using the phone.
Some people speculated that he stopped using the phone because he realized that the phone not only transmits information or transmits phone calls, it also transmits a signal that could be used for targeting cruise missiles.
2 years later, Al-Qaeda attacked the USS Cole in Yemen, killing 17 Americans.
When the Cole disaster took place, I had brought to my desk in this office every stitch of NSA reporting on that could in any way be related to this. And I went through it report by report.
The NSA hadn't missed anything on the Cole, Hayden says. The warnings just weren't there.
I can't guarantee you, in fact, I will refuse to guarantee you, that even if we are at the top of our game, that ill things won't happen to Americans.
In the summer before 9/11, there were more than 30 separate intercepts suggesting pending strikes on American targets.
And the people whose communications were intercepted were purposely talking in a vague way,
referring to specific aspects of the operations with phrases such as, the refrigerator will be delivered tomorrow, which is an actual phrase from an intercept.
on the assumption that they would be overheard, and that when they were overheard, it wouldn't be of any great use to the people who were eavesdropping on them. And they were right.
But on the day before 9/11, two key messages came in. The match begins tomorrow, and tomorrow is 0 hour.
You have to understand, though, that these two oblique phrases, in hindsight, we now know referred to the 9/11 attacks, but in the context of the much larger conversation in which they were buried, it wasn't clear at all whether they referred to an operation in Europe, or in Asia, or the Middle East, or the United States.
It's very difficult to take information like this out of context and determine that tomorrow is when they're going to blow up the World Trade Center.
When news reports revealed just how much the NSA and its partners had heard, bin Laden and his followers began to operate with more caution and shrewdness.
One of the people associated with him was using a satellite phone or a cell phone, and the U.S. was monitoring that, and that's why they were closing in on bin Laden at that point up in Tora Bora.
It was in December 2001 that bin Laden was hiding out in the caves of Tora Bora, Afghanistan.
Bin Laden and the person who had the satellite phone decided that the person who had the satellite phone would go one way and bin Laden would go another way. And that's what happened, so that the U.S. began focusing on the person who had the phone, and a week or two later they finally captured him. But by then, bin Laden had completely escaped.
Despite that failure, signals intelligence has helped track down some of the most wanted members of Al-Qaeda.
One of the Al-Qaeda senior terrorists that we have caught, Sheikh Mohammed, was tracked from Quetta to Rawalpindi, where he was eventually arrested, used by tracking his satellite phone communications as he spoke with his compatriots who were also in hiding in Pakistan.
That may further unravel the Al-Qaeda network and maybe even lead to bin Laden's capture. So that's certainly one of the major accomplishments of SIGINT in the terrorism war.
There have been other major accomplishments in the war on terror. In 1999, the so-called Millennium Plot to bomb Los Angeles International Airport was foiled because of Echelon's signals intelligence.
We were able to catch the bomber at the U.S.-Canadian border, and thanks to signals intelligence provided by our Canadian compatriots, we were able to prove that the individual in question was not just a tourist, as he claimed, with a trunk mysteriously loaded with high explosives.
Because the work of signals intelligence is so sensitive, it's rare for the public to hear about plots that are successfully thwarted.
The traditional intelligence mantra of protecting sources and methods is particularly important for an enterprise like ours, signals intelligence, because an adversary can make it simply go away by choosing a different way to communicate. And so we're very sensitive about talking much about ourselves.
In fact, almost every time signals intelligence has been revealed, the source of the intelligence has disappeared. For example, after the bombing of a discotheque in Berlin in 1986, Echelon immediately zeroed in on a suspect, Libya.
NSA and/or its partners intercepted a series of coded messages sent from the Libyan mission in East Berlin to Tripoli, reporting on their accomplishment of the mission, and that Colonel Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, would be very pleased with what he read in the newspaper the following day.
President Reagan decided to retaliate by bombing Tripoli.
The evidence is now conclusive that the terrorist bombing of La Belle discotheque was planned and executed under the direct orders of the Libyan regime.
Well, Reagan had to give a reason for our bombing Tripoli, and he had to give as much convincing evidence as possible. So President Reagan went on national television and said that our evidence was intercepted communications from the Libyan government.